Welcome back to the third installment of the Public Forum Blueprint. In this video, we'll cover the fundamentals of flowing. We'll address any questions you may have about how to flow, including what to use, what to write, and how to make flowing second nature to you. So, before we go too deep, let's answer the first question. What exactly is flowing? In every round, each team makes dozens of small arguments in the pursuit to present their contentions, refute the other team's contentions, and ultimately win through the layers of the debate. Unless you've got an outstanding memory, you'll need to take notes during the round to keep track of everything that's been said. Flowing is a comprehensive note-taking technique that helps visualize the arguments and responses made by both teams throughout the debate. It allows debaters to condense what would otherwise be a 20 to 30 page transcript of the round into just a few pages. Not only does flowing help you keep track of the many arguments in every round, but it becomes the template on which you can visualize debate. Essentially, the flow is the chessboard of debate, a space for envisioning the arguments and their interactions, presenting a complete image of the game. So, we have a broad idea of what flowing is, but how do we start this special note-taking method? At the beginning of every round, you'll want to have at least 2 blank pieces of paper or documents open on your computer. One sheet will be used for flowing your constructive speech, the case with your contentions, and the other will be used for your opponent's case. Each paper is used to represent a side of the flow, with the cases beginning the af and neg sides. After the first speeches, the flow tracks the layers of arguments made against one another, placing each argument next to the previous argument it is responding to. The flow is best structured as a speech-by-speech note-taking method, where each additional speech constitutes a new layer of the round. The rebuttal would come after the first speeches, adding another layer to both sides of the flow, with the summaries and final focuses continuing this exchange. As each layer adds onto the previous one, the debate eventually funnels towards a few main pieces of offense for each side, with the end of the flow displaying the final arguments for the judge to consider. Note that cross-examination is not considered part of the flow, but instead an independent part of the debate round where debaters can ask each other questions about their arguments and evidence. Once we have an idea of what flowing is and how it looks, what do we actually write down? The most important part of flowing is understanding how to utilize shortcuts. Simply put, if you try to write down every word that is said in a debate round, you're going to need a lot more than 2 hands and a couple pieces of paper. But even standard note-taking methods, such as writing quick phrases or incomplete sentences, won't be enough to keep up with the pace of a debate. Because of this, it's important to be intentional about what you write down when you are flowing. There are 2 kinds of shortcuts that debaters utilize to become the best flowers they can be: written and mental shortcuts. Written shortcuts are pretty straightforward. How can we reduce the amount of time spent writing down the note for each claim or warrant? Off the bat, you can think of all the many ways to do this, such as using acronyms or common shorthands. So for example, you can always use the 2 letters O and V to represent an overview when it's first read in the debate. Alongside what you'll develop on your own journey, we recommend using these 3 common writing strategies to become a fundamentally sound flower. The first is shortening common words and phrases. On every topic and every general issue area that topics can be organized into, there's a very common set of arguments and words that you're going to hear rather frequently. You can create 1 to 3 letter shorthands for these phrases, regardless of how common they actually are. Some of these shorthands will only be used by topic, and others can stay with you for your entire time in debate. Let's take the example of a rather unique topic back in 2020 in January, which held resolved the United States should end its economic sanctions against Venezuela. This topic related to some broader issues that span across many topics, such as US-China-Russia relations, democracy and authoritarianism, and many features of economic growth and decline. Shorthands for these were taken from previous topics, and these can be used for any topic in the future. However, the topic also included specific references that needed shorthands, such as the Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, sanctions, and really enough, the whole phrase of double-digit economic growth. Notice that these shorthands are unique enough that it's not likely that you'll confuse them with meaning anything else, especially if you're working to generate these shorthands throughout each topic. However, don't make them so strange that if you forget the meaning, you've lost the point of the flow itself. It's almost like a password. The second written shortcut strategy we recommend is using symbols and markers. Throughout the round, arguments will relate to each other in all sorts of ways. It's important to keep track of these many relations using more than just words. Symbols and markers are non-written illustrations used to articulate or organize the flow. The most common would be math symbols or arrows that represent words and different concepts, such as more and less, increase or decrease, and more. Arrows are typically used to direct the flow of the round, flowing towards the next argument made on that part of the debate. Furthermore, utilize lines and circles to separate parts of the flow and draw your own attention to specific parts, and you can even create distinction for certain symbols. So for example, if you're going to use O and V as a shorthand for overview, just also circle that OV so it's easily distinguishable from the rest of the flow. If that overview ends up being very important, you can draw a circle around it later at the end of the round to remind yourself to deal with it. Third and finally, the best shortcuts come from creating your own heuristics. Sometimes we all find ways to just remember certain things. Whatever it is that's going to help you keep track of everything in the debate round, use it to your best ability. For example, let's look at the basic structure of an offensive argument: uniqueness, link, and impact. Debaters in public forum rarely specify what part of their argument is the uniqueness or link, but they'll still specify when the impact begins, probably because it makes it easier to weigh in the end. Because of this, it became helpful for many debaters to create their own symbol to represent the impact of an offensive argument. Over time, they shared the symbol of the exclamation point, a symbol of importance and emphasis representing the value of an argument. When I flow around, that exclamation point is used whenever I hear the word impact or feel that an offensive argument is coming to its end. But take the exclamation point as just one example. Every year we see the new generation of debaters add their own inventions to the toolkit of written shortcuts. As you advance debate, you'll sharpen your personal toolkit and further the tradition of flowing. But the second type of shortcut is a mental shortcut. If you're new to debate, you may not have experienced this yet, but many debaters go through a phase where it's difficult to listen to everything that's being said in the round and understand it while keeping track of everything that's being said. Especially in complex rounds where you're under pressure, this is normal to expect. Flowing is just as much a mental game as a note-taking method. Instead of thinking of flowing as a way of just quickly getting everything down that's said in the debate round, we want to think of flowing as an extension of your own memory and understanding of the arguments. If you've ever seen any of those Iron Man Marvel movies, think of Jarvis and his floating holograms helping Tony Stark sort of expand his thinking space and how much he can mentally handle at once. The flow is the space that represents the round, both for your notes and for your own very momentary thought processes and understandings of the arguments made in the debate. So, mental shortcuts are strategies for simplifying the number of claims that have to be written down in order for an argument to be fundamentally captured on the flow. For an easy example, if a team uses 10 pieces of evidence in their uniqueness, but all in all they only really make 2 to 3 arguments, must we utilize only our written shortcuts and write down the claims of all 10 pieces of evidence as fast as possible? No. We can obviously shorten this complexity into a few claims and then use written strategies to write those claims down efficiently. Mental shortcuts are important because they actually slow down the debate round. In all our years as debate coaches, we've seen what must have been hundreds of examples of debaters who often feel that rounds are moving too quickly. Using mental shortcuts means writing down less and spending the majority of time listening. Try to understand the basic argument being said, uniqueness, link, impact, etc., and then note down those main sections so you can look back and use your notes as a reminder of what you now understand. For an example on these concepts, let's go back to our AF contention from last video. If you remember, we outlined an AF argument on the universal healthcare topic, and this contains everything that would be said out loud in a debate round. However, as you can see, the combination of first, mental, and then written shortcuts produces a significantly concise flow wherein very little has to actually be written down to capture the argument. When you're in round, it's organizing your mind and your notes that will produce a profound flowing ability. So far, everything we've covered is going to help you note take and remember what is said by other people in a debate round. But if the flow is going to be our debate chessboard, it also needs to be a living document where we can form our next speeches while keeping track of the debate as is. The flow is an extension of your thinking in the debate. While it's your primary responsibility to contain arguments made, it is also where you'll be organizing your active thoughts in the round and using the flow to maximize the value of your speeches. If the flow is going to be more than just a record keeper, and instead a useful tool in the round, two things need to happen. First, use the flow to prepare your speeches. Before your speeches, you want to be preparing what you're going to say by also jotting down quick notes that you'll reference while giving your speech. If you're reading pre-written responses off a computer, still flow these responses beforehand so you're keeping track of the debate. However, the debate is always going on, and there isn't that much prep time to write stuff down. It'll be obvious that you should use cross-examinations that you're not a part of to prepare, but when else can you be flowing your next speech? While your primary responsibility is to listen when the opponent is speaking, if you're keeping up with what they're saying, and you can also find time to write down response ideas during their speech, go right ahead. If you're using mental and written shortcuts, it shouldn't take too much to write down something useful that's going to help you in your speech. Some debaters famously learn to hold two pens in one hand, switching which pen is touching the paper throughout one speech. The best strategy for preparing your next speech is spelling out your collapse, or marking out which one or two offensive arguments you really want to defend going into the final few speeches. When you realize you want to go for something, you can just throw a quick arrow forward and circle the end, indicating that you should focus on it for your next speech. In a good debate, a chain of these arrows with circles should direct your eventual offensive collapse. But the second way we can use the flow to its maximal advantage is to make it a space to compartmentalize the round. Normally when you take notes, you're just writing words down to read later on. But the flow is a visual structure, providing a platform for arguments to play and test each other where you have about half the influence of what's dropped in. It's a very active game. The best way to play this game is just by visualizing it. But as we saw in the last video, there are a lot of arguments and a lot of ways we can visualize debate rounds. For the flow, let's rely on our basic image and compartmentalize, or break it up into the main sections on the flow and use those little boxes to understand the debate. You should organize contentions by the pieces of the offensive argument and take note of any spikes or other arguments in the first speech. As rebuttals and summaries introduce more arguments, distinguish offensive and defensive arguments throughout the different compartments. These generalizing representations of the round come together to create a bird's eye view of the debate so you can make high-level strategic decisions while looking at many arguments at once. Just as we use written and mental shortcuts to summarize arguments into concise writing, compartmentalizing the flow compacts and simplifies the round for the debater. Compartmentalizing is done with and without written shortcuts. For written examples, you can draw lines between different parts of and between entire contentions. Noting what responses are offensive and not defensive ones also allows you to categorize arguments efficiently including offensive and defensive parts of large arguments like overviews or disadvantages. If you remember from our last video about arguments, whole offensive arguments need uniqueness, a link, and an impact. So, when offensive responses are read that link to the same impact as a contention, they usually need a response to the uniqueness. You should take note of those distinctions. As we continue into the 3 pillars of debate, and especially our video on strategy, having this flow vision becomes essential. And finally, let's talk about pre-flowing. Before your rounds, you should come with a prepared flow of both your cases. Given you know your constructive speeches word for word before the round begins, judges can expect you to come already ready to give your speeches from the moment everyone else is ready. Try not to hold up rounds. While traditional flowing is very spontaneous, pre-flowing allows you to be far more intentional with what you write. If you want all of your pieces of evidence, main argument parts, and any other helpful notes for the round, you can include that on your pre-flow going in. For others, it can be helpful to work with a quick, minimal pre-flow, relying on their computer or personal memory to understand, defend, use, and weigh their case arguments. Try out different forms of pre-flowing and see what works for you. Just make sure you're getting them written before you head to round. We could talk for hours about the itty-bitty of flowing, all the specific styles and examples of shortcuts and such. But if you're going to develop your own flowing abilities, it's continual practice that you're going to need. The best thing you can do on your own is flowing online debate rounds. A quick Google or YouTube search brings up a deep reserve of public forum debate rounds, with varying styles, topics, and eras being represented. Flowing rounds is a great way to build familiarity with the mosaic of debate while also improving your flowing skills. Videos are also helpful for going at your own pace. Pause, slow down, and go back at any point while watching and flowing and make the video work for you. But don't just flow rounds for whatever reason. Take the flow itself seriously. Make sure to utilize shortcuts and compartmentalize the flow to think through the round. Even pause the video to think what you would have done if you were a debater. And because flowing is practiced by itself, you can be intentional about practicing flowing in really anything you do that includes keeping track of arguments. So, today we covered the fundamentals of flowing, from what flowing is to how to master it over time. This video also concludes the first segment of the debate fundamentals, and is thus a transition to our next segment on the 3 pillars of debate: your judges, topic preparation, and strategy. In all 3, remember to draw from what we've covered in these introductory videos to continue your growth in public forum. Thank you for watching this video and our series thus far, and we look forward to seeing you next time.